come out of those live visuals from the PFB breakfast briefing that was taking place this morning. We are joined now in our Nasrec studio by Ms. Zulu, the head of the drafting committee, and also an NEC member of the ANC. A very good morning to you, ma'am. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Good morning to you and good morning to all your viewers.
Well, let's first of all go into the ANC itself and to the unity in the ANC. We know coming out of this policy conference, you will be going to Parliament into a vote of no confidence with the President. Has there been enough robust discussions around the unity of the ANC to make sure that that unity is shown outside of this policy conference as well?
Yes, unity is paramount to the ANC. Throughout its history, there is just no way that we could have been able, first and foremost, to survive as an organization for 105 years if we did not have unity. So unity is being tested, yes, we agree. It's being tested under new conditions altogether, conditions of both being a liberation movement, a party, but also at the same time being in government. And that on its own is something that causes sometimes a lot of friction and a lot of contradictions here and there. But at the end of it all, unity is paramount. And any member of the African National Congress really who's got absolute commitment and absolute understanding of the role of the ANC in society would have to work towards ensuring that unity continues to be our strength rather than our weakness.
Now, some forums speak of inclusive growth, where some forums speak of radical economic transformation. Is there a sort of united voice regarding the economy that the ANC has? Some people see it as contradictory. Some say the one is a way of implementing the other. Where does the ANC stand on that?
It's very simple and straightforward, and for anyone who really creates that contradiction is really unfortunate, because the ANC has repeatedly explained exactly what do we mean about radical economic transformation. We have made it very clear from the very outset that the challenges that we have are that of poverty, unemployment and inequality. And the face of poverty, unemployment and inequality is black people in the main, in the majority. We're not necessarily saying that others do not have some people who are poor amongst white communities, for instance. We're not saying that. But we're just saying that the bulk of people who are facing these challenges are black people, particularly those that were marginalized in the past. We've also explained very explicitly that this is all about ensuring that the structure of the economy enables those that were marginalized to also enter into it. We've also said explicitly the management of the economy of South Africa needs also to be in the hands of the majority who were left out. We've also indicated that a lot of the support that we give as government is not necessarily discriminatory, because we're not saying that we will block any other who comes in asking for assistance if they need it. Just a simple example that in your small and medium enterprises, the majority of those SMMEs who are struggling are SMMEs that are owned by black people, owned by youth, and owned by women. Hence our focus in ensuring that we need to give greater support to them. And again, I want to put it on record that there is no document of the African National Congress that says any other person who comes in, irrespective of color, when they need the assistance, they do not get the assistance. Because, for instance, if I speak to my portfolio as small and medium enterprises, anybody who needs assistance must be given that assistance, because the issue here is about creation of jobs. So if somebody has got a business that really looks promising and it's a business that really shows that it can grow and they need assistance, with pleasure they can come through to us. We will be able to assist them. But we cannot run away from what happened in the past, that apartheid made it impossible for black people to enter into the economy. Whether they wanted or not, they just made it impossible, because the laws were discriminatory, written down as laws that says if you were black, you cannot enter into the mainstream economy.
Well, talking about those people that couldn't enter into the mainstream economy, they are quite robust in their demands, and that radical economic transformation is what they want. And then taking a look at the business side, they are quite conservative about the change and quite a bit reluctant to the change. They don't really want to take take full advantage of it, if I can say that. So how will you as the ANC actually make them feel that it is okay and that you have both interests at heart?
Well, we are a government for everybody, as I've indicated earlier on. And the fact of the matter is that in order for us to grow the economy, we need to make sure that we support small and medium enterprises throughout. But at the same time, we do appreciate that the people that you are talking about, I'm not understanding very well when you say they are conservative. Are you talking about black people, or are you talking about, I don't understand.
No, I'm talking about the big businesses. They are, yeah.
All right. No. Well, look, the other issue here is that we are in a country of a capitalist mode of production. Let's start just there and say that capitalism is the same everywhere you go. But in some countries, which are advanced countries, there is a common understanding that if you are business, you are big, you've got to also enable the smaller businesses. And that's why, as a government, and in fact, that's the reason why we have been having the breakfast shows this morning, because those are the platforms where we have been trying to get both small and medium enterprises and big business to come and have a conversation with them, to say to them, if you look at the history of South Africa and the fact that we need to make sure that we bring in more and more people into the economy, big business has to open up the opportunities. And it is not very complicated. Firstly, there's got to be an understanding that in order for us to have peace, security, and stability in South Africa, we've got to have less, if not no, people who are still regarded as people who live in poverty. And that is not a responsibility of government alone. It's a responsibility of our communities, of government, and the private sector. And the opportunities, for instance, for SMMEs to grow, you will find them in big business. If big business can begin to open up in their value chain, if they can source out things that can be produced by small and medium enterprises, instead of blocking that, you find that a big business, instead of enabling and giving some of that to small and medium enterprises, they create their own. So they swallow almost everything. And yet, at the end of the day, big business are not the ones who are going to really create more jobs than the jobs that we need. And so to address, again, we will keep on going back to the triple challenges that face us: poverty, unemployment, and inequality. And I know you are saying that they are conservative. I don't think they are conservative as such. My belief is that they need to have a bigger picture of understanding the importance of ensuring that South Africans do get jobs. So they have to get a bigger picture of the creation of the jobs. And they mustn't leave it just to government alone to do that, because it's also in their interest. I mean, if you look at the banks, we're talking about the fact that there's only 4 big banks in South Africa. But if small and medium enterprises would be assisted in terms of the loans that they need, they would create more jobs, and therefore more people would go and bank their money. And by the way, the number of the unbanked in South Africa are quite big, are quite large. And so when we say in terms of transformation in the financial sector, we need to see more smaller banks that would really be helpful to your small and medium enterprises, the better for South Africa.
Now, will the ANC also be discouraging things like monopolies, cartels, and discouraging businesses from rushing to the courts to oppose a transformative policies, such as, for example, the mining charter came out? It's something of a progressive charter, but some of the companies, feeling threatened by the charter, are rushing to the courts. How will the ANC discourage such activities and actually encourage them to work together with the government, together with the small and medium enterprises, to actually form a better economy holistically across the country?
There's got to be that understanding again. We know that a business is about making money, it's about profits. We appreciate that, we understand that, because that's just what capitalism is about. However, we are saying to all of them, there's got to be that understanding that when black people begin to feel that, yes, they have the political freedom, but they're not seeing that translating itself into enabling them to also create the wealth for themselves, and also for them to build their businesses, and also for them to feel that they are part and parcel of the ownership of the means of production. It's about dialogue, it's about engagement, and I'm sure that you know many people have been calling for a CODESA of the economy of South Africa and so forth. The first and most important thing is, as an organization, it remains our responsibility and our duty to get more and more people on our side. We don't want to have fights because the fights are not necessary. So actually, to think that you've got people who are now fighting the charter, the mining charter, and by the way, it's not just the mining charter. We have to talk about the mining charter, talk about the finance charter, talk about the many other charters which we can talk about. So everyone, that includes your black business, your bigger business, your smaller business. We need to all come together and have a conversation that says, ultimately, what kind of South Africa do we want to see? Yes, we know that they need the profits. Yes, we create the conducive environment for them, obviously, to make the profits. But the profits must also be understood from a point of view that we need to change the ownership of South Africa in terms of the economy is concerned. So they need to help us here. For them to keep on running to the courts is also very unfortunate, because wouldn't it be better for them to say, let's sit around the table and see the proposals that we are making in the charter that will make it difficult for them to get their profits rather than to be running to the courts, because it's also just not fair that at the end of the day, we've got the separation of powers and all that, and then somewhere along the line, there's a feeling that the courts will have an upper hand into political issues. It's also not right. But of course, we respect there is a constitution. It's their constitutional right, again, because we want strong institutions in South Africa so that people can have institutional recourse. But the problem here is that the majority of our own people do not even have that possibility of running to the courts all the time, because they don't even have the money to be going and paying that. We'd rather have less of running to the courts and more of the engagement, with an understanding that this government of the African National Congress has no other intention other than ensuring that the wealth beneath the soil of this country, the most black people, those that were previously disadvantaged, also begin to feel that they can see the benefits of the wealth of the country.
I want to turn the conversation a bit to the structure, the ANC structure. I know there's been a lot of talks around this in the policy conference. What are your views on this? Do you think that the ANC organization needs a new structure, that it needs improving, and that it will actually help the ANC in the long run, or do you think it should stay as is?
Well, we have a report that was presented by Comrade Mbalula on organizational renewal. And this issue of organizational renewal has been ongoing simply because we are in a new environment. We are in an environment of governance now, which therefore means the ANC has to look at itself as an organization and make sure that the structures that it has are structures that are able to respond to the challenges of today. So we cannot do things in the same old way, and therefore it means our own structures need to be re-engineered, redone, hence the whole discussion about organizational renewal. All the commissions had a very vibrant discussion around it as to what kind of structures do we need to have. I mean, issues like even the branch of the ANC, which is at the lowest level within our communities. The issue here is, what kind of branches do we need? What kind of members at a branch level do we need? And it's simple. We need branches that can also be able to respond to the challenges of the areas where they live. Then the entire structure from a national, provincial, and local, we're looking at how do we ensure that those structures respond to the needs of today. For instance, I can talk about communication. We're saying that there's a battle of ideas out there. How does the ANC respond to the attacks that it gets, both from the opposition, from a whole range of other people who are involved in trying to show that the ANC is not the right party today? So we need to structure ourselves in such a way that we are able to respond to the challenges of today. When we were formed in 1912, in the 70s, in the 80s, the situation is very different today.
Now, at the Progressive Business Forum this morning, a question was asked about perhaps changing the South African Reserve Bank's mandate to make it work for socio-economic welfare of marginalized people. Now, do you think that the capital class can be trusted to help transform the economy?
Well, I don't think we can put it that way, as if they can be trusted. We do need that all institutions, including the Reserve Bank, they have to be there in order to assist us to respond to the challenges. And therefore, when you know that the Reserve Bank is owned a lot by external people, you will be asking yourself a question. Those people are only looking for their own interests. They're looking at whether their money, their investment and whatever is growing. Yes, it is true, their investment and all has to grow, but there is a challenge that South Africa is facing. And therefore, reviewing what we have as the structure and everything of the Reserve Bank, we need to look at it from what happens in other countries. In all countries of the world, interests of the country come first. So even in South Africa, the interest of South Africa now has to come first.
Well, let's look at the private sector. Will the ANC be relying on the private sector to help get the black majority again involved in the economy more?
The private sector doesn't really have much of an option here in as far as ensuring that the growth of South Africa also takes into consideration including people that were left out. So that's why we believe that public-private partnership is very important. And again, I will go back to my space as a Minister of Small and Medium Enterprises. I do believe that if we have very strong engagement with the private sector, which we're now beginning to have, I've indicated in a few platforms that when I started 3 years ago, I was told that there's a mistrust or there's no trust between government and the private sector. And my view is that we need to work towards ensuring that we build the trust. If there's a trust deficit, what are we going to do to make sure that we build the trust? I mean, in most countries, whether developed or underdeveloped countries, governments try to work very close with the private sector. We do understand what needs to be done in terms of creating a conducive environment also for the private sector, whether it's in terms of legislation and so forth, or doing business, making it easy for them to do business. We do understand that. But we think that there's a greater responsibility that we carry as government, addressing the imbalances of the past and therefore making sure that black people also begin to feel. And we will have to keep on repeating this over and over again, because if we don't, chances are that we will end up with people rising and saying, what was the point of us having this democracy when we are not benefiting from a financial point of view? And that doesn't mean people are just wanting to be given. People want to work. They all want to work. And anyone who says that black people want to remain in the social welfare for the rest of their lives, I don't think it's true. I don't think really that it's true. The majority of our people, all they want to do is to wake up in the morning and work and earn a living, whether they are going to work as in jobs and so forth, which must be created by government as well as being created in the main by the private sector and small and medium enterprises. People want to get up in the morning and know that they're going to make sure that their spazas are profitable. And my view also is that we don't want to remain with spazas for the rest of our lives. I think that black people want to see themselves moving from a small spaza into some small little supermarket, which is owned by them in the township. Not a supermarket that is imposed, that the same big companies are now getting into the township and occupying that space. All we want to see is an environment that is created for black people to wake up and work for themselves. That's one of the reasons actually we're looking at social development and the grants. And we're saying it's not sustainable in another 30, 40 years. We don't think it is sustainable. So what do you do, that being the case? You then begin to say those that are actually getting, that are being assisted, it is possible for them to think about how can they even use that very little money. And I know sometimes I say so and people say, no, but they need all that money. The fact of the matter is this. If you get the grant and maybe you put aside 20 rands, maybe you put aside 50 rands, maybe a group of women come together and say, we want to start a cooperative or we want to start something, they will start something that will be sustainable for themselves, which therefore means they will not depend entirely on the grant. And I know that many of them, especially women, they use that grant. They go and buy little things to come and sell in their communities because they want to augment the very little grant that they are getting. So all I'm saying, ultimately, in another 10, 15, 20 years, those people need to find themselves in a better space. And their children need to find themselves in a better space where they are better educated, they've got better opportunities. I don't think that women and men who are selling in the street want to see their children coming back to do exactly the same thing. There's got to be a movement, because here I am, I'm sitting here. I was brought up by a grandmother that was very resilient. She was very clear that none of her children, none of her grandchildren would ever be domestic workers. And she took it upon herself to make sure that her children were educated and her grandchildren were educated. And that's me. What did she do? She had a small little business. And what did she do? She looked for opportunities different from others. And she didn't have a bank to go to. She didn't have no education whatsoever, but she made it possible. So black people overall want to work for themselves so that they can then begin to see themselves in the greater economy of South Africa.
Well, clearly some issues there that, the conversation does continue. As you said, repetition, but thank you so much for joining us. We do know that you have to dash right now. That was Ms. Lindiwe Zulu, the head of the drafting committee here and also a member of the ANC NEC, joining us in studio, just talking to us about some different policies that will actually help small businesses work together with big businesses and grow the entire economy of the country.